Hello and welcome back to RotoViz Overtime on RotoViz Radio, brought to you by Blue Wire. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. And today, as always, I am joined by Shawn Siegele. I'm also joined by Blair Andrews. We did try and link this up last week, gentlemen, for a rerun of our team from 2021, where we came second place in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. We're trying to go one better here today. We rounded up the wagons again, and we're going for it. From the 107, we are joined by Blair Andrews also. And Blair, the other keynote is Shawn is fantastic at team names, as I'm sure you well know at this point. Last year's team was named Unauthorized Cinnamon, so I had to run it back with that as well. So Unauthorized Cinnamon have made their selection from the first pick. We were on the clock again today. This is a running theme of our drafts this week, Shawn. But we did take... Who did we take, Shawn?
We took Kyle Pitts because he is going to be the tournament winner in all formats this season.
All formats, not just tight end premium?
Well, I mean, if he crushes everybody in tight end premium, he's going to be a pretty big weapon in regular formats as well.
Yeah, and when we were on the clock making that selection, we missed the Shawn Siegele filibuster at that point, but we also talked about some players that we do like. And some of them are still going to be available here. Hopefully, when it comes back to us, you could go the direction of the players that we talked about. Blair mentioned Saquon Barkley as a potential target. He has been going at the back end here of round one into round two, so he would probably be an ideal scenario to come back to us. Who, Blair, are you thinking of maybe let's give us three names that we're hoping that gets back to us here in the mid-second round?
Yeah, well, I mean, if Saquon or DeAndre Swift made it back to us, I think that would be pretty amazing. I don't think those guys are falling that late very often.
Today's the day. Barkley goes, as I say that.
Yeah, there we go. CD Lamb goes. He was the other one I was going to name. Maybe if Mark Andrews makes it back, that would be an interesting start.
Double tight end, maybe to kick things off. The reason we take Pitts there, that was shown the exact spot we had in the main event that we did last week. We took Kyle Pitts at that spot. So I thought, why not 107? We'll run back the pretty much same roster at that point. Travis Kelce goes off the board one pick before. The dream scenario there is always that Ja'Marr Chase kind of will slide back to you at the 107, but it hasn't happened here. Shawn, any other names really standing out for you? Feels like Swift or Andrews probably are my two primary candidates. Then you're into kind of the Deebo Samuel tier of wide receivers at that point. Anyone else standing? Oh, the other guy I'll mention here. The big dog could be in play if Derrick Henry makes it there as well. So who do you want, Shawn?
Yeah, Blair and I actually do have some shares of Derrick Henry. His price in the second round of some drafts, and especially in some of the Superflex drafts, where running backs are a little bit more powerful relative to starting lineup position. I do like him there. I think he's getting really heavily discounted. I don't think there's any excuse for Derrick Henry going behind Joe Mixon, for example. We're now one pick away. He is still there. I think that Alvin Kamara and Javonte Williams are interesting picks if we do end up getting in a situation where we don't really like any of the receivers. You mentioned that we took Pitts at the 107 last week. I mean, when you get stuck in the situation where Ja'Marr Chase goes fifth and then Austin Eckler, who probably would have been the other legitimate choice, goes sixth, then you just want to make the same selection. You want to win both tournaments now. Unfortunately, here, CD Lamb has not fallen to us. Najee Harris, who he's the player I see go at the widest range early on. He gets picked in the mid-first. He falls into the mid-second. I still don't have any real interest in him here. I mean, Tyreek Hill would maybe be my other selection. I don't feel like any of the priority targets, and specifically from the list I put out last week, especially in terms of ADP values, I don't think there's anything here.
But we can't just skip the pick, so we are on the clock. We've missed out on Swift, Henry, Mark Andrews, CD Lamb, Saquon Barkley have been the last 5 picks. Blair, 20 seconds to go. Is there a name here that really stands out for you?
Javonte is someone Shawn mentioned that I'd be happy with.
So we'll take Javonte Williams there. He's the guy who has just such a great path to being next year's 101, right? We think about what he did last season, all the points that he put up in almost a pure timeshare, almost 50-50 with Melvin Gordon. I think that Melvin Gordon is still going to be involved this year. His numbers, his peripherals, fantastic in 2021. well, very strong in 2021. They were fantastic in 2020. He's a guy who is still playing at a very, very high level. I think that this is much more an Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon situation than perhaps the prices on Gordon suggest. And in some ways, even the prices on Jones and Williams suggest. At the same time, if he pushes this to a 65-35, you're starting to get into a range where he has that individual week upside, even in a committee that is very, very playable. And then once he steals the job, once they get in this environment where you're playing the Chiefs, you're playing the Chargers, you're playing the Raiders, and you have no margin for error, and you're out there in the third and fourth quarters, they need to score points, they need to score touchdowns. I mean, this could be that Jonathan Taylor situation. Right now, the Colts are talking again, we're going to use Hines. That works great until the first bullets are fired and you have one of the best players in the entire NFL and you need to have him on the field, right? So we could see that from Williams. If anything does happen, obviously Melvin Gordon, a little bit of an older back at this point. If he gets dinged up, Javonte Williams is that good. We expect the Denver Broncos offense to be that good. If Taylor and McCaffrey struggle to stay healthy, you could be looking at Javonte Williams as the 101 in 2023 drafts.
I'm glad, Sean, that you made the pitch there to make me feel better that we had to take Javonte Williams in the mid-second round. That's made me feel a lot more optimistic.
Well, in our most recent Stealing Bananas main event, Ben and I got some Javonte there. And again, I mean, you want to win both contests, so why not spread it around? You want to get that share.
Get it in both.
Yeah, when you don't have any other good options, it's a little bit like the quarterback dynamic. You take those stars when things get flat. If you have someone that maybe you don't like at the price or you don't exactly like in a vacuum, but everything else is flat and you see the upside, that's where you would take a Javonte Williams. We can't change the fact that we got the 107 and the 206 is also not great if the rest of the draft is efficient. Now, we've been lucky enough that most of the time, someone more exciting than Williams falls. That wasn't the case here. It's still a very exciting 1-2 start. You have second-year players at positions where those guys could easily become the best players in the NFL at tight end, at running back in the very short term.
Yeah, no, I am joking. I haven't got to draft a huge amount of Javonte myself this kind of summertime into the start of the season. It just felt like a little bit of a letdown there because Swift and Henry, I kind of thought that somebody might try and take Harris there, but you mentioned the wide range of spots that he tends to go. He had fallen past his ADP there, but he goes one slot after our pick. So we will see here what the options are when we are on the comeback. It has been quite heavy at the running back position so far through the draft. We only have two teams starting off wide receiver. The team in 1 and 2 have now gone running back, wide receiver to kick things off. So our hope here is that somebody out of the T. Higgins, DJ Moore, kind of field falls back to us. Have you a preference between those guys if, say, both were available? And have you anyone else that's in the mix for you at that particular spot, Blair?
Yeah, the guy that I'm probably most there he goes. T. Higgins was the name I was going to say, but he just got drafted. I definitely like Moore, and I think Waddle's price is probably a little bit too low, although he's a bit of a reach here, but I'm kind of okay with that.
So we're one pick away, Sean. I think Moore for me is the pick if he makes it one pick more here, please. Is he the pick for you if he does get to it, Sean?
Well, at Mike Williams, I think that he is the guy who should be generating the type of enthusiasm that we're tending to get from players like Allen Robinson and Michael Pittman. I know Blair's not quite as high on him because he was willing to trade him to me in one of our dynasty leagues recently. I think that Gabriel Davis, knowing that he's unlikely to come back in 406, I mean, that works a lot better if you had the Jamar Chase start there. Without that, it probably isn't nearly as much of a need to reach for him. I have moved him up on my rankings consistently throughout the offseason. I think that even though his price has been inflated by all of these week 17 plays and the fact that he ties in nicely with Josh Allen, all of those types of things, that's what's pushed his ADP up in so many of these best ball formats. And then we anchor to that. At the same time, Davis is actually a potential superstar, right, in that type of offense. And so I think with Williams and Davis, pretty easy plays kind of pivoting off of the enthusiasm for teams like the Rams,
I'm good with Davis as well, if you want that. And actually, I don't have a lot of Mike Williams, so maybe maybe this is the time to get some exposure. On the other hand, Waddle gives us another year 2 player.
Were you out on Blair? Sorry.
Go ahead. Who do you want, Blair?
I guess Davis would be my pick.
I find like we've taken Davis now, so I'll give my thought on it. I find Davis a little optimistic at this range of drafts, and I know that's where he goes, but I'm always willing to take the other 3 names that we talked about over Davis. So I'm hoping that Blair's right on this one. I'm going to defer to Blair. But if these are some of the times when
Blair, don't blow it.
Yeah, pressure's on. I'm hoping that one of those other guys make it back to us now that we touched on already, but we'll see how that plays out. But there, DJ Moore goes off the board. He would have been my call there. So it'll be fun at the end of the season when we're picking up the check that Blair will be able to say, I told you so. And Gabe Davis will be the smash.
Well, I have so many shares of Jalen Waddle in the mid to late 4th that I'm passing on him in the mid 3rd. In terms of my rankings, he's been an easy value there almost all offseason. I have gotten a little bit more optimistic about Tyreek Hill. He's had a great training camp. Obviously, the Dolphins have a lot of incentive to make that trade look good. I mean, if Waddle is who we think that he is, I mean, they picked him early. They had incentive last year to make that pick look good. But it's in a lot of ways, emotionally, you get in these situations where the front office, to justify their situations, to keep their jobs, you need that most recent decision to look good. And so I do think they will go a lot through Tyreek Hill. Hill also in that situation where he was flukily bad last year in terms of his deep connection with Patrick Mahomes. That's given him a little bit of cover to actually make some negative comments about Mahomes as a deep thrower. We think that part is silly, but we know that obviously Hill can still get deep. He became a little bit trendier when he does catch that deep pass in the preseason. We've watched that dynamic with both Kyle Pitts and Tyreek Hill. For neither of those players was there any question about whether they had big playability. But when you're in a little bit different situation, with Hill obviously changing teams, with Pitts having a quarterback that people don't believe in, it was nice to see those plays. I mean, Jalen Waddle caught a lot of passes last year, did he not, Blair, as a top 10 pick rookie?
That sounds right. He's the sort of profile we definitely want to be targeting. I think he would like to probably see more efficiency from his rookie season, but I mean, it's hard to argue with what he did on a Dolphins team that was really pretty bad last year.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that he gets back to us here, but I'm not overly optimistic. We have a few names in the queue: Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, maybe even Juju Smith-Schuster in this range of the draft, and I'm really hoping that we do get Waddle. Is there somebody, Blair, who you add into the mix that I haven't mentioned there at this point?
Amon-Ra St. Brown is pretty intriguing to me in the range that is coming up. Maybe that would be a little early for him, but he's someone I'm happy to draft around here. George Kittle looking like a pretty good value, although we do have Pitts. Yeah, maybe it's not that good a value on Kittle, but Waller went in the 3rd, which messes things up.
And Waddle's after going off the board, which hurts a little bit as well. Sean, how are you feeling here? I know I joked after the Williams start, and I think we can get this going, but feels a little bit of underwhelming at the start of the first 3 picks for me personally.
I feel like this isn't the draft I thought I was going to have to defend the 2nd place non-title. We were the first losers last year. This year, we're just going to be losers, is Colm's early analysis. I think Deontay Johnson should obviously be going earlier. He was at the 212 in the MFL 10 of death. That might be a tad bit early in the mid 4th. Seems kind of silly. I think that Jerry Jeudy is a great pick here as well. Amon-Ra, someone who has been rising. It's almost like it took to the very last couple of weeks of the offseason to where drafters were really ready to say, look, I mean, he was maybe the best receiver in football over the final month. He's going to take a step in year 2. I still think the target competition there could be pretty tricky at this price. You could say that as well for Johnson and Jeudy. So all 3 of those players, somewhat similar in terms of the thesis. I wouldn't expect any of them to come back.
I would be Deontay Johnson. What about you, Blair?
I'm good with Johnson.
I feel like we keep getting Johnson in the 4th round because we pass on Waddle and DJ Moore in the 3rd round. Is that that's my feeling over the last week, Sean? How are you feeling about that thesis?
Well, I mean, all of those guys are going in that range. And it's one reason I think you can reach a little bit in round 3 if you don't like the guys who normally go there, because there are about 4 players in round 4 and arguably 2 players in round 5 who are at least as good a value as the players going in round 3. And what I mean there is that they're at least as good a selection straight up. And so once you get them in rounds 4 and 5, fantastic prices at that point, but you can only take one of them in each round. And so if you want some teams with more than the player that you can get by picking once in each round, then you have to reach a little bit, and it's fine. I don't think that it hurts you. Now, I mean, DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Gabe Davis, I think that those are probably tilted a little bit to the median outcome in favor of the 2 guys that we didn't draft, and yet the ceiling may still go in our favor. I like DJ Moore. His peripherals are fantastic. He's just a flat out a very good reality player. That's the type of player you want to have on your team. I'm not convinced that Baker Mayfield is the guy that takes him to the truly elite level, whereas Davis and Mike Williams, I mean, those guys are catching passes from Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. They have the overall profiles to be alpha receivers. They've got the size they can get down the field. They can score touchdowns. Their quarterbacks have the massive arms. Their teams are going to score a ton of points. That's the question that we have here with Deontay Johnson is, will he be that? You look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. Can he do that with Jared Goff, especially when DJ Chark has had a nice camp, when TJ Hawkinson is very good, when we know they're going to dump some passes off to DeAndre Swift, and when Jameson Williams is going to come and probably emerge during the fantasy playoffs? I mean, there are scenarios where that works out for St. Brown. Maybe he gets a lot of defensive attention this year, and then when Williams is running some of those vertical routes late in the season, the volume is there for him. He goes to this team that's building a really cool roster out of the 104. Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, Amon-Ra St. Brown.
I was actually wondering if Blair was also drafting that roster. I thought that could be a Blair.
That's why he gave us Gabe Davis. He's like, no, I'm gonna take it down with.
He also took T. Higgins on this. So I have a feeling Blair's drafting 2 teams in the same draft here, and he's just keeping the best one for himself.
Have to watch out, Blair. That's not legal.
Yeah.
Play it, see how the teams turn out, and then you choose which one you're going to go with.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do here. So it'll be fun. I really do hope this team really smashes this year, and people can listen back to this episode when this team is really in the final week and hear my enthusiasm after the first 4 round. But something I am very enthusiastic about is since we made our selection, Deontay Johnson has been Justin Herbert, James Conner, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who we touched on. Then it has been Patrick Mahomes, Ezekiel Elliott, AJ Dillon. Then it went Chris Godwin, Brandon Cook. So we do see some wide receivers going off the board. TJ Hawkinson goes off the board after that. But that has also given us a possibility that Jerry Jeudy, for example, who we touched on, may sneak back to us here. Juju Smith-Schuster's there. I know, Sean, we talked about Rashad Bateman in one of our recent drafts. DK Metcalf, Darnell Mooney are all wide receivers in this range. There's actually a possibility that over these next 2 picks, we may get 2 of those guys. So we are 1 pick away. I'll wait till we're on the clock, and then we'll see. But how are you feeling, Sean, about this particular selection?
I think we're set now. I mean,
I'm getting a lot more enthusiastic. I'll tell you that much.
Good. I'm taking Jeudy early because I want to get them both, but I don't know. We'll watch the first week of the season, and the Ravens will run the ball 45 times, and the 3 passes they throw will be Mark Andrews. But I mean, I might even be higher on Rashad Bateman in a vacuum than Jerry Jeudy. I love both of these options.
Okay. I'm good with both of them, but I think I probably take Jeudy first and then see if Bateman makes it back. How are you feeling, Blair?
I'm good with either of those options. Probably lean toward Jeudy as well.
Okay. Yeah, I like the way that last kind of 12 picks have really played out. Terry McLaurin and Dallas Goedert also went in the meantime before it came back to us. So we had a stretch kind of from the 2 players that I know you mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown as well on that last selection, but between Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, and Amon-Ra, and we get 2 of those guys, which is fantastic. We have a bit of time to get to our next pick now, but the players in the queue I have are Bateman, who we touched on, who would be a dream scenario if he makes it back to us. I've drafted a lot of DK Metcalf this year, and I've drafted quite a bit of Darnell Mooney. They're usually my priority targets in this zone of the draft, but you also get into the kind of elite rushing quarterback tier as well here. Have you any other names, Blair, that you want us to add into the queue here ahead of the middle of the 6th round?
I don't think so. As we watch Lamar Jackson go off the board, he was someone who would have been interesting if he had made it back. Obviously, Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts are almost in that same tier, perhaps. But I'm really hoping the guys that are in our queue will make it back.
Okay, and Sean mentioned that he is the preference, obviously, for Bateman. I would have Bateman ahead of Metcalf, and I have Bateman has just gone, unfortunately. I was going to ask you, between the three of those, have you Bateman as a clear ahead of them, and then out of Metcalf and Mooney, have you a preference?
Probably Metcalf, but that's more of a toss-up to me.
At this point now, when we're down to 2 options, I'm just hoping that one of them makes it back. Sean, anyone else for you to slot in here? Damian Pierce has continued his ascent. He's in this zone, but you've made me draft a running back in the 2nd round, so I don't want to draft a running back for a long time.
Right, so we're getting into the range where I think that Brandon Ayuk, Drake London, and Devontae Smith are good selections. I might like those guys pretty evenly with Metcalf and Mooney, to where taking either Hurts or Murray is maybe appealing, in that it doesn't always set up that those guys are the best options. I have a ton of Joe Burrow and a ton of Trey Lance because they're that little bit less expensive. That does matter a lot. I have had quite a few drafts recently too, where I've really pushed it at QB and missed. I'm not necessarily looking to add a best ball tournament team here that is weak at the quarterback position. The three of us drafted sort of a fun team last week. That
you're talking about the team that we drafted yesterday, which we took Trey Lance and then nobody to the 19th round.
That's true, Colin.
You didn't even after you draft Trey Lance?
No, that was our theory. Trey Lance is a one-man wrecking crew. So we then selected Malik Willis and Sam Howell because we expect both of those guys to be starting in the fantasy playoffs, and they could be, they would be top 8 quarterbacks if they were starting with those profiles. Still on board with the rookie QBs. We're not going to get off of that until, it's just going to fade away too. This is one where you almost can't be wrong, because it'll be a weird deal where somehow they don't ever start and you just never know, and you can't be proven wrong. Those are the really good bets to get on. We see Elijah Moore go here a couple of picks ahead of us. Darnell Mooney also. Oh, DK Metcalf. So that does actually fit quite nicely with my preferred option of a quarterback.
Do you have a preference between Murray and Hurts on a team where we don't have any of their receivers?
One option is you could get Hurts here and then get Smith in the next round, but you could also do it the opposite way and get Hurts and then Lance and then get Ayuk, but you could end up getting none of them. So I don't really have a strong preference at this point of the draft.
I have a lot of Hurts, and I think that he could finish at the very top. More glowing reports on him again yesterday. Murray has maybe in some ways more paths and even more upside. Blair, you're the third man who got us there last time. You make the pick.
I would go Murray in a vacuum, but I could go either way. Oh, it's Murray.
That's what happens when there's 5 seconds. Yeah.
I was like, Murray in a vacuum. And then as I was clicking, I heard the but. If I had heard the but, I would have switched, because, you still have 4 more seconds. That's the whole point. Right. What was your second part of that sentence going to be?
It was going to be like, I think they're close. So I don't have a strong preference here. I guess I would have Murray even maybe in a tier above Hurts, just because we know that offense is probably going to throw a lot, and he also has that rushing upside.
The Blair, your rankings are not currently up on the site, so this is a good time to give you some friendly ribbing about that.
Yeah.
Just because you don't want drafters to be following that close to your picks, is that's a situation you're like, I won so much money the last 2 years. They're going to need to pay a little bit more if I'm going to put my rankings up on the site.
I have to maintain that advantage. That's right. No, it's more laziness than strategic.
Well, Blair's working very hard behind the scenes, so we know it's not laziness. There is a lot to do right now, and we appreciate everything that Blair is doing, including guest appearing on our show today. Joe Burrow does not come back. Where's everybody on the double QB at this point? Everyone's still in on Trey Lance after the third preseason game.
Yeah, I'm definitely on Trey Lance. The other quarterback that, again, we're looking, the only other probably stackable option is going to be Russell Wilson at this point, but I'm open to just not stacking. The one thing I will say is Blair's team out of the spot 4 is looking amazing at this point. They've now added Joe Burrow with T. Higgins to Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Marquise Brown. So we have got stiff competition here. But I'm open to when we come back here. Obviously, it depends who's available, but I do like the tier that you mentioned of Ayuk, London, and Smith. I would be open to Trey Lance as well at that point. But I feel with what we've done so far, I'm probably leaning to one of those wide receivers over the quarterback in the next round. How are you feeling about that, Blair?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that if none of those 3 get back, then I'm definitely good with going Lance if he makes it back. But my preference would probably be London, Ayuk, Smith in that order.
Yeah, I've got a lot of teams with Judy recently. And Wilson is the perfect way to play that at QB with Judy. The fact that he goes a little bit later than these other quarterbacks makes it an easier play. And yet I haven't been able to execute it more or less once because he is in that range right with those wide receivers. He's currently going at the 7-8 turn, which means if you have Judy in the middle, you're going to have to take him in the 7th most of the time. Obviously, if you're at the 7-8 turn, you're still following through the middle of the 8th round on occasion. But I just don't think that you can take him in the 7th. He has lost the hybrid element to his profile that makes him very reliant on this through the air element to Sutton, Judy, Alberto, KJ Hamler. We may see that again, but there are so many other ways to play it less expensively. Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, even Kirk Cousins, especially if you have Justin Fields and then you have especially if you have Justin Jefferson and then you have Justin Fields as the later additional hybrid option. So it's frustrating to me, I guess, that he's priced correctly because our teams load up on players that we think the prices are a little bit off. And unfortunately, if the price is fair, you're not going to have a lot because you're drafting players who have a lot of upside at their price throughout these builds.
Yep, no, that's exactly right. And the 7-8 turn makes that a little bit tricky, but we are going to have some options at the wide receiver position. I'm open to going wide receiver here and then seeing if either Lance or Russell Wilson come back to us in the 8th round is probably the way I'd be willing to risk it here.
I'm good with that. I think that after Lance's 3rd preseason game, you've seen his price slipping a little bit. We also were able to get Wilson in the 8th in the draft we did with Mike Leone and Dave Cabin on the Fantasy Football Report, I believe. So,
how do you feel, Sean? We're still not on the clock. We're waiting here for this pick, but
yeah, we're not on the clock yet. But I think it has to be Ayuk or Smith. Smith becomes a little bit less exciting without Hurts, but not that much because one of the things that we're looking at with the Eagles offense, one of the reasons why we like it so much is it has all of these elite talents and you don't necessarily have to play them together because of the rushing element that Hurts brings. They're all very good pivots off of each other. I don't think that you want to have a lot of them on the same team like you might want with the Bills or a Bengals, but individually they have so much smash upside. I was hoping it could be Ayuk, and then there would be at least a small chance that Lance would fall. That would be a nice pairing, even though, again, the 49ers are a very similar type of play to the Eagles, where you don't have to have those guys stacked up on teams. You just want a little bit of exposure. I'm still on Smith here. Blair, is that your pick?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and this here, I'm bringing up the questions of bye weeks and all these drafts, Blair. So I'm interested to get your thoughts. In that situation, Ayuk has a week 9 bye, but we already have 3 guys on week 9. Would have brought us to 4, and we're thinking about getting Russell Wilson in the next, which would have brought us to 5. Have you any concerns in these drafts over, loading up on too much on the one bye week, or is your thoughts that if everyone's off that week, you'll be getting them all as options the other weeks?
Yeah, I don't usually put a lot of I don't think about that a lot at running back and wide receiver in particular, just because I figure I'm going to be able to fill out those positions with other bye weeks later, even though, having a lot of your top guys on the same bye week does potentially hurt you for that week. But it's not something that I it's not something that I'm particularly concerned about.
Okay. Are you particularly concerned that we have had a run of quarterbacks of Trey Lance, Russell Wilson, and Dak Prescott?
Yeah, that was a bummer. I'm concerned that we won't get any of our guys, although I think we still have some options here.
Yeah, I think I didn't want to pass on Devontae Smith when the option was there. So, Sean, in hindsight, would you have still taken Devontae Smith over one of those quarterback options?
Yes, because Justin Fields is still a better pick than any of those players. The problem that we run into over and over with Fields is that you go after it and miss. Then you're into a world of hurt. We had the draft yesterday or the day before where we were going to pick him in round 10. He goes one spot ahead of us. Everybody else wiped out. Having to get the 2 quarterbacks in best ball does create a fun dynamic because you actually have to do it. You can't just sit there and say, at some point we'll address it. You get outside the window and then you continue to not really want to address it because the options are bad. And so from that perspective, you have to kind of balance the aggressiveness and the courage to wait and make sure you're not overdrafting the quarterbacks. You want to get them on some teams at a good value, but especially at this $125 price point, you don't want to be drafting too many dead teams either.
Yeah. Next question I'm going to bring up is our options usually in this zone are going to be some of those 0 running back candidates, the likes of Rashad Penny, Devin Singletary go in this zone. Wide receiver wise, Kadarius Toney is in this range. But with having taken Kyler Murray at the point we did, have we any interest here in DeAndre Hopkins? We have silence.
Hopkins is someone that I have mostly been avoiding because I think, it's tricky because obviously he's going to miss those weeks. And, you also have concerns about whether he's going to be the same player he was a couple years ago, even when he comes back. So I've been wanting to get a really good price on him if I do draft him. And I'm not, the 8th round is maybe fine, but I would like to get him even cheaper.
Okay, that takes us into the question, are we looking at a second running back at this point?
This is a flat round for receiver. It starts to be the first round that's pretty exciting, specifically in this best ball FFPC format. At running back, the receivers that we're really looking at, I would think, would be in the 10th. Pickens and Sky Moore are going at the end of 9, but they can fall into 10, obviously. Treylon Burks, middle of 10. Rondell Moore, late 10. He's the reason that I don't have much DeAndre Hopkins, in addition to what Blair mentioned, because if you push Hopkins and miss, you can still select Rondell Moore. I think that's the better way to play it, and maybe even straight up. And then you wrap into mid 11 and you can get Romeo. You go into 12 and you can get Garrett Wilson. I think with those options and with no clear options in round 8, this is almost always a Rashad Penny, Devin Singletary type of range for me. The only problem is that those guys are such good values that you do end up with such heavy exposure. we know that either of them could lose their workload. We know either of them could get hurt. So there are some downsides. But again, when we're drafting a team here to try and win the whole thing, you're not going to pivot off of the best values just because there are ways that could not work out.
Agreed. So no, it's just I wanted to talk through just in case that was an option. Then we have basically Penny and Singletary are probably the two preferred options. Blair, do you want to make the call?
Let's go Penny.
I was waiting for Sean to drop in about the Arizona side of things, that we would just take Trey McBride later as well. So I thought that was going to come in as well at some point.
Kyle Pitts and Trey McBride, you play that week 17. Falcons, Cardinals, you got the two
tight
most
end
exciting
shooter.
tight ends in football at that point. I don't know. I mean, obviously, the Trey McBride bet is a little left fieldish at this point, at least based on the price. Not too many other people are making it. Fortunately for me, all of my co-drafters are very much on board at the price. I mean, in round 20, what do you have to lose? Well, the roster spot. You want to make sure you are using all 20 to the best possible value. I love this team, guys. I mean, at this
The optimism
point,
is growing.
Yeah, I mean, because Ken Walker is currently on the shelf, it's easy to forget about him and think, okay, I mean, Penny is the guy. He is one of, I'd say, about 5 picks seem to be the clearest, like, screaming values in drafts. I do wish I had a little bit more Walker as well, because you draft him, a guy with his profile and speed, talking about, perhaps a poor man's Jamal Charles, and with the Penny health risk. I mean, you can talk yourself back on the other side. I wish I had more Walker, but Penny, Garrett Wilson, Blair, who are the other players that I just almost have to force yourself sometimes not to take because they're undervalued by 3 or 4 rounds? And if you were purely going by your board, you'd start to get like 75% exposure.
Well, I am probably close to 75% exposure on Benjamin, but in terms of guys that are going a little bit like in a range that are more meaningful, yeah, Kyle Pitts is actually getting close to that, but I'm happy to have him here.
I'm just going to ask Blair, is that really not you that's drafting that team in spot 4?
It's really not me.
Oh my. To get Singletary there. I'm just going to keep an eye on that.
If it were me, I wouldn't have said we should draft Kyler because I would have wanted him for this Marquise Brown.
Yeah, for the stack
Kyler
there.
stack.
Yeah. But yeah, pretty fun team. But I do think that the draft is falling. Even there's a few players we did miss out on that we might have wanted, but we're having options, which is always a good sign when we have those different potential options at this point of the draft. Yeah, I'm starting to.
Hopkins.
Yeah, Hopkins goes at the back end of, or the start, sorry, of the 9th round at the 8-9 turn. I am starting to feel the optimism, flowing through my body as we progress through this draft. We have Kyle Pitts, we have Javonte Williams, we have Gabe Davis, Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, Kyler Murray, Devontae Smith, Rashad Penny. So I think at this point, we're probably in the range of what we normally are kind of looking for. Sean mentioned some of the wide receiver targets that will be available through the next kind of 4 rounds or so. I think getting another 1 or 2 wide receivers onto this roster over the next 3 or 4 picks would start to really start to flesh it out nicely. So hopefully it's going to be an exciting run here. Blair, how are you feeling about this team as a contender to the $200,000 top prize?
I think this team has a really good shot. One thing that was so notable about the finals last year was that all but one team had Mark Andrews. And I'm really looking forward to Kyle Pitts being that player this year who you have to make the finals.
Something that obviously we talk about uniqueness at times as well, but I have seen it pointed out on social media over the last couple of days. Kyle Pitts sometimes going as high as the 104 in some of these drafts, but I do think it is going to be a situation where people probably aren't taking Pitts where we've taken him here to pair with somebody like Javonte Williams, which gives you a pretty unique roster straight away from how you've taken those guys. So we are 2 picks away. Blair, what are you looking at here? And then we'll get Sean to give his 60-second talk while on the clock.
Well, I like Damian Harris at the top of our queue, although I think you can make a case for some of these receivers a little bit early than where they normally go, like Sky Moore and George Pickens. This has been a pretty quarterback heavy draft so far, so we might also want to look at Aaron Rodgers.
Blair, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers there. Do you have him considerably above Justin Fields?
No, not far above Justin Fields. Like you mentioned, I don't have my rankings up, and I also don't really have them anywhere. So I'm not with Aaron Rodgers. So maybe
I just got drafted as well. Yeah, it has been a very quarterback heavy draft so far. But we are on the clock, Sean. So we'll touch on quarterback after this, but I think we probably go here with either Sky Moore or Damian Harris. Have you any other options you want to put in the mix?
Well, I don't think he's necessarily the right play, but George Pickens is the other guy who is pretty exciting. I still think that his path to targets probably isn't the same as Moore, and definitely not there like it is for Treylon Burks, who even after a horrific offseason, it still looks like he's probably going to be the main guy for the Titans. They're going to load him up as much as they can.
We do have Deontay Johnson's the other thing to add there. I don't know if that matters.
Yeah. Let's go Sky Moore. 9 seconds.
That's the assertiveness that we're looking for, Blair, in these sort of situations. We go Sky Moore. Sean, who was your... I was between Sky Moore and Damian Harris. I was going to see how you did the tiebreaker to break it. So Blair goes with Sky Moore. Who would you have went with there, Sean?
I was going to select Damian Harris. I think especially in best ball, he's going to score a lot of points. I think that this Patriots offense perhaps gets off to a slow start. I mean, they're installing something new. They've got young players. They've got a young quarterback. They've had some unfortunate injuries. I was really excited to see Tyquan Thornton. It sounded like he probably was the biggest playmaker that they had in camp. Obviously, we know that Ramondre Stevenson is probably on the verge of stardom, right? And yet Harris definitely in line for that role. The price that you're getting on him is simply fantastic, right? And I think that this is a scenario where even if Stevenson takes a step forward, this could be a 1A, 1B. I don't necessarily think that the Patriots backs should be that much less expensive than, say, the Packers backs are. You look at the Patriots, they scored the second most points at the running back position in all of football last year. They have the injury to, well, they had the retirement first of James White, and then it looked like Ty Montgomery was going to play maybe a meaningful role, and now it's a little bit less clear with his injury. I think, still seemingly minor injury. There's the assumption that those touches go to Stevenson, and yet Stevenson and Harris very similar in terms of profile. They've talked about not giving away basically what the play is with their personnel this year. And if they alternate drives and Harris gets his receiving EP numbers up, it's just going to be very hard for him not to be a big contributor, especially in best ball, unless the offense just flat out breaks entirely, which is a possibility anytime you're doing something new. But when you have a lot of talented players and you have a head coach like Bill Belichick, I think that mitigates concern about the extreme downside scenario to an extent. Now, having said that, we've got Javonte Williams, we've got Rashad Penny. Wide receiver really shuts off completely once Garrett Wilson and Romeo Doubs are gone. Now, they go fairly late, but you do need to have that position locked up. You start trying to get some really late picks at it, and running backs are just so much stronger at the end of drafts. So we want to make sure we're ready to do that. Sky Moore sets us up to be able to take advantage of all that value late. And like Blair said, we've got to select Eno Benjamin.
We did pass on Damian Harris in the last round, and Sean, I'm disappointed to say, has gone off the board here. We are 2 picks away. Blair, who are some of your favorite options here? We touched on Pickens previously. Sean had mentioned him. This is a tricky zone because we do have the likes of Melvin Gordon, and we already obviously have his counterpart at this point. Somebody who'd be interesting here to me is Naheem Hines. I would also be interested in Kenny Gainwell. James Cook could be a potential option here that we missed out on. Devin Singletary. Does this feel like a running back zone to you? The other question is it a wide receiver zone?
Well, yeah, I think it could be a running back zone there goes James Cook. He was someone who's a little interesting at this price. I think if Pickens makes it back, he becomes someone we should definitely consider since we were talking about him last time. Might be a little bit early for Rondale Moore, but he might be a good one to stack with Kyler Murray.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. That would make sense. How are you feeling, Sean? The other player that I'll put the name out there is Michael Carter, but I'm probably looking to get two of these guys over the next two picks. And how do you want to play it?
Well, the element we talked about not pressing and missing on was the second QB. And this is probably the spot to take Justin Fields. We have a variety of receivers who could fall back to us. We have a variety of running backs who could fall back to us. The problem, of course, is that we're only going to get one pick in the 11th round. So all those guys fall. We're going to have a difficult choice, and we're going to be frustrated that we didn't get, one of both. But once Fields goes, I mean, there's really no other good way to play the QB position if we're wanting to have two really high upside threats once we get into the fantasy playoffs.
I was trying to look to see where he was going over the last few days to see how likely it was that he would make it back to us. But
mid 11th.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That I mean, with how many quarterbacks have been going early in this draft, like seeing Dak Prescott go in the 7th, you really probably can't afford to wait.
No, I don't think so, because we'll talk about it. I don't think he can, and as you say, that just Kirk Cousins goes off the board. So the options, if we didn't take Cousins, for example, were going to be Justin Fields. The other quarterback that goes in this range is Tua. Then you're into the Trevor Lawrence area of the draft. So although we had to make that move a little bit earlier, I do feel quite good about taking Justin Fields there. And the other part, Sean, I think was what you were kind of leaning to, the players that we have, the likes of George Pickens, Rondale Moore. I mentioned a number of running backs in the zone. Even Tyler Boyd would be in this range. Rashad White will be in that range when we get back at this next pick. So I feel like we have one option to get Justin Fields, but we also feel very good about all those other options that we have in the queue. Is that where you were looking, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get back and want multiple players and feel like multiple players would have been pretty key to the build. But that's the great part about this, and the reason why the RotoViz FFPC roster construction explorer, the other roster construction explorers that we have, why they're so valuable to you, because you do have to make decisions that then have consequences, right? They have trade-offs. So we look at that there. We make sure we get the two quarterbacks. That now allows us to use our late picks more efficiently and to really load up on our favorite sleeper candidates. I would love it if Rondale Moore falls to us. His ADP over the last week is at the 10-11 turn. We're obviously drafting again at 11:07, but it would be cool to get him with Kyler Murray. There's a little bit of a mystery injury with him, but it sounds like a mystery injury that is not particularly serious. I think all of these teams, as they head into week one, if there are minor soft tissue injuries for any players, they're just desperately hoping they can get them all the way back to 100%, so they don't go out there in week one and aggravate it. You want to get off to a fast start, but especially early, the risk of all of these different injuries that relate to different types of conditioning. It'll be interesting to see how football evolves over the next decade. There are so many of these muscle injuries. It seems like some of these should be preventable, right? You have some other sports out there that require consistent, explosive movement from a dead stop. Seems like the injury rates aren't as high. I obviously am not an expert. I know the NFL teams do all kinds of really advanced stuff. These guys work out really hard. If it were a simple, easy fix, they would have already done that. So mostly I'm just hoping health for them and health for us. We talk about injuries being a big part of fantasy, and yet no one's wishing that on anyone, the longer our rosters overall can stay healthy, the more fun fantasy football tends to be, especially in best ball, where you can't swap players out for someone else. Discussing that, Rondell made it through a couple more guys. We have Hines on the board here, Gainwell, Carter, Rashad White. I don't think the White's going to have much standalone value, although, again, the most recent report was that the Buccaneers would like for Leonard Fournette to play less. You wonder if that's coming from the people who realize that Leonard Fournette's not that good and could probably use a little bit of a break, or it's coming from the Buccaneers decision maker, who is Tom Brady, the guy who greenlights his own mid-camp vacations and that kind of thing. I mean, do we know what Tom Brady wants? Because that's going to be the thing that determines if White has standalone value. He does seem like the player who, if you are looking forward to weeks 15 through 17, you're like, oh, that guy led the NFL in running back scoring. He seems more likely to do it than Kenneth Gainwell or Nyheim Hines.
Yeah, Sean, I don't know. I can't judge if you're trying to continuously lower White's ADP or if you don't think that he's going to be any good this year. I feel like it's the second option, but I'm hoping that he's still going to be the play. Blair, 2 picks away. Rondell Moore for me is the absolute clear pick. If he gets back, Rashad White has gone off the board. Rondell Moore goes off the board too, which is a bit of a crushing blow there. Would have fitted this team pretty nicely. Wide receiver wise now, it would be Garrett Wilson or Romeo Doubs that would fit into the mix, but I feel like the wide receivers here are probably a little bit tough, or sorry, the running backs are a little bit tough to pass up. Who would you like to see added to this roster?
I think that the guy I'd be looking at would be Gainwell, probably. I think Garrett Wilson has a good chance to get back to us in the 12th. The only reason that I'm kind of leaning toward one of the running backs here, but I could be talking to almost any of these guys.
Yeah, the other thing that's a shame, we have Javonte Williams. We have seen Melvin Gordon continue to slide in this draft. I've been adding him in those drafts where I don't have Javonte. Sean, who are you looking as we wait for the draft in front of us just to make this pick?
It's probably Gainwell here. There have been some disturbing trends, both with Boston Scott and with them claiming Trey Sermon. He goes 1 pick ahead of us. We don't have to worry about that. Now we're kind of back into the situation with both Dobbs and Wilson, possibly one coming to us in 12, to where if we had taken Damian Harris instead of Sky Moore, we probably would be set up a little bit better. I think Isaiah Pacheco starts to be interesting now when we're talking about total upside. Also think Gerald Everett is someone that we should consider. I mean, this isn't a one tight end format, even if you get Kyle Pitts.
Yeah,
I'm probably
Man Center gives Everett 65% chance to get back to us.
For which one, Blair?
Everett.
Who are you wanting?
Well, if we want to get like both Everett and Garrett Wilson, for instance, we should take one of them here. So I guess I'm leaning. I guess we're taking Michael Carter.
Yep. We need to pick quicker. I'm not against that pick, but that wasn't my pick. I can't blame Sean for that one. What happened there, guys?
Well, we got down to 1 second. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's the top guy in the queue, so it would have been fine either way.
I'm good with that pick. I
mean, Michael Carter, when we don't have Breece Hall,
yeah,
it's just a pretty straightforward pick. He was so good last year. We should have been talking about him a little bit more, and we do need a running back there. We've let it get a little bit late. I think that what Blair was saying is true, that going Everett and Wilson, probably the way that we should have done it. But the other player that I like here too in 12, which again would have freed us up to take either of the other guys, I'm taking Raheem Mostert in basically every draft. And maybe that doesn't make sense, but because, if you're going to get up to 70, 80% on someone within a 2-week span, you probably want it to be a guy who's only played like 2 or 3 consecutive healthy games in his career. But
this is the year.
this is the year. And one of the things on Everett and him making it back is that we can go Fant and McBride. We can go with Likely. I don't really care for it, but there is some volume-based play for Austin Hooper and Hayden Hurst, and they're pretty inexpensive. But, I mean, this is really like a 3 tight end format. I think you can probably get away with less if you have Kyle Pitts, but the tight ends are big hammers in this.
Yeah, and when there was the uncertainty, I know we ran out of time. I thought that Sean was going to click on the Gerald Everett pick. That's usually Sean's play there when we're at when the Gerald Everett and we need to get him point comes up. That usually means that that's the button that's getting clicked. I wouldn't have been against that, but again, we have options, and I'm not against Carter either. I have been drafting quite a bit. It feels that's the second time in this draft that we've had that run of kind of our 3 prime targets going off the board in a row. But Michael Carter is not a bad consolation prize. Now that we have time to talk that pick through, now that it's already made, who would the pick have been for you, Blair, at that point?
Well, I think Everett would have made sense. I like Michael Carter there. I think that he was a good pick, so I'm definitely happy with that. I'm always happy to kind of push running back picks later and later, even in these best ball formats. So I definitely would have been okay with a Romeo Doubs pick there too. But I like.
How come you made us draft a running back in the 2nd round then, Blair? That seems a bit. You can't say you're going to push running back as late as you can and then draft one in the 2nd round.
If you draft one in the 2nd round, you can push the later running back picks
even further. Yeah. We are nearly back up here though, and we are going to have some options, but unfortunately Gerald Everett isn't going to be one of those. That means that we have hopefully an option here to get Garrett Wilson, who's top of our queue, Pacheco, who Sean mentioned is there. We have Raheem Mostert in the queue. How are you looking to play it here, Sean, at this particular point? I feel like there's a pretty decent drop off at wide receiver over these next couple of rounds if we don't go wide receiver here, but how are you feeling?
We're up to 5 receivers. We probably want to finish with 7 or 8. Like you say, it's going to drop off a cliff. The only 2 guys after this that I really have hardly any interest in, well, I guess there would be 3. KJ Hamler, not as good, I don't think, if you have Jerry Jeudy. Wan'Dale Robinson and David Bell, those guys are later picks. We don't have the tight end in consideration here anymore. Pacheco is interesting because he's had a fall without a corresponding rise from Ronald Jones.
Yeah.
I don't think that makes sense. The Chiefs running backs are going to score, although it could be in a way that doesn't work at all for fantasy. Garrett Wilson, probably the play, push Raheem Mostert to the next round. That's where his ADP is mid-13.
Yeah, that's probably what I would do. But Pacheco it's interesting the way he soared up so high and then has continuously crept back down over the last week to 2 weeks based on the buzz.
It's still got to be 50-50 that, whether he or Dameon Pierce scores the most points. And there's a big gap in price.
Yeah. You mean just between those 2 guys, but the guy that's going to score the most points is Ronald Jones.
Ronald Jones. That's not 50-50. It's 90-10 because the Chiefs are going to play through Ronald Jones.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I thought you were going to say the Chiefs were going to score more points, so that meant that Pacheco was going to score more than Pierce, but what you meant was that Pierce is going to score more than Pacheco because Ronald Jones is going to smash.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we also can draft him later as well, but yeah, I think Wilson was the play there. Sean, you mentioned about the pick that we did earlier where we took Sky Moore. Do you think in hindsight that is a pick that you would flip to swap Harris out there for Sky Moore?
It would be for me because I actually have Dobbs and Wilson in the same basic vicinity. Dobbs has been more impressive than Sky Moore has been. I don't know that there's a huge difference in their prospect profiles. Obviously, Moore is younger, drafted earlier. Both of those things do matter, but Dobbs has been so good and he's been able to do so many different things. And that offense has nothing, right? I mean, that offense is so devoid of receiver options and guaranteed targets that Allen Lazard is a 6th round pick. I love Allen Lazard, right? He's big. He was one of our freak score stars. He was wildly undervalued in the original NFL draft. Should have been like a 3rd round pick. Instead, he falls out of the draft. That never made any sense. He's gone to Green Bay and established himself as a very good 3rd receiver. He and Marquez Valdes-Scantling are 3rd receivers. They should not be going in the 6th and 10th rounds of drafts. More going within 1 round of MVS, I think, is a good pick for us. And, this preseason and camp stuff could be a mirage. You do see some of these guys, and especially late round guys, where the team doesn't have that same incentive to make themselves look good that they have with Christian Watson. I mean, anytime that you have a guy that you draft, you're like, oh, we were on him, other people weren't, and he goes out and plays well, that reflects well on you, but you also need Christian Watson to be the guy for you. And then you have the quarterback in Aaron Rodgers pushing Allen Lazard, Sammy Watkins, and Randall Cobb. I mean, the thing that's going to help is that Watkins and Cobb have been done for a while. And if that doesn't manifest in Dobbs and Watson playing more early than a lot of people are expecting, that'll be a horrible sign for the Green Bay Packers. I just don't think that the coaching staff and Aaron Rodgers, even with his stubbornness, are going to go that route. I mean, you've got some rookies. I mean, Dobbs is he's been a complete and total revelation, right? And then you have Christian Watson, one of the best athletes in the NFL immediately. I'm excited to see that. Blair, let's talk about some things that you are looking forward to seeing in the first month of the season. What storylines are you going to be having your eye on in week 1?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to be watching kind of the Chiefs wide receiver usage in week 1 to see if it actually is looking good for Sky Moore in the opening. Obviously, we don't want to put necessarily too much stock into like early season usage, especially when it comes to these rookies, but you want your guys to get off to fast starts. And so that's something I'm really going to be paying close attention to for all these rookies that I'm drafting a ton of.
Yeah, Sean mentioned the Packers too, but if you pair the Chiefs and the Packers, the wide receiver cores there for both rosters, it's going to be very, very interesting to see our thoughts heading into week 2 versus what they are now. It's going to be interesting. You mentioned Lazard too. There is some reports that he is a question mark for week 1, so that would even put more questions into if he does miss that and things happen for certain players in week 1, what happens then when he's back. So it's going to be interesting. The Chiefs backfield too, I think we have to keep a close eye on, because the moving parts there are going to be very, very interesting to watch. And if it's a case that Edwards-Helaire doesn't have a good chunk of that backfield coming out of week 1, the options are really open for those other 3 guys that are in the backfield. So the Chiefs for me are very interesting. It's also going to be interesting because we've seen so many quarterback moves around the NFL. Russell Wilson particularly, how does he settle in Denver straight off the start? How does Tyreek Hill start off in Miami? How does Tua Tagovailoa look? I can't wait. It's hard to believe we've been drafting so long and talking about it for so long. It's hard to believe, like a couple of days away, these games are going to actually happen. It actually caught me nearly by surprise this week when I started to open up the thoughts to actually seeing games this coming week. We are 1 pick away, though. Pacheco is still in the mix. He does go off the board, I was going to say. But Sean, Raheem Mostert does make it back to us, so he's the pick here for me. Blair, have you anyone else you want to pitch in to have an argument with Sean here about not taking Raheem Mostert?
No, I actually like Mostert here, and I'm happy to see Pacheco go off the board, so we didn't have to debate that one.
I think we've kind of, Sean hasn't, we've gone against, we've given our pick a few times. I feel like we had to give Sean that one anyway. Sean, team Mostert over Pacheco, even after what I was saying about how the backfields could potentially play it for the Chiefs.
Yeah. If this were a managed league, then I think I would have even more interest in Pacheco. Now you think about it and you're like, if you're drafting a lot of teams, then you just take it as part of your portfolio and you get that upside. I do think that, if you're in a 125 price point and you're not drafting 20 teams or 30 teams or what have you, Raheem Mostert is basically what we hope that Pacheco could be. It's probably a 2-backfield instead of a 4-back backfield. Now, Myles Gaskin is someone who has been good in the past. He could be a sneaky contributor to that offense. It's also a lot easier to see Mostert actually being the clear starter by week 3 or 4 than it is, I think, for Pacheco. But like you mentioned, if CEH doesn't come out of the first week with total control of that, it's massive red flags for him. And I don't think that he will. I think it's going to be spread. Edwards-Helaire just doesn't have the talent to be the main guy. And you have plus athleticism from the other 3 players. When your backups are more athletic than your starter, and your starter has been scuffling, it just makes it difficult for him to come out and really control the backfield. So the Chiefs will be a team to track really closely. For me, the Chiefs maybe aren't the number 1 team, although from a fantasy perspective, we do want to see how the workloads break down. I think they're going to be a very effective team. I am worried that Sky Moore maybe won't even play that much in the first month of the season. I've been skeptical about McCole Hardman, and yet the Chiefs are a team, they need to get off to a fast start. They may feel like the veterans give them the best route. They're also a little bit, not arrogant, but they're confident in their returning players being able to execute what they want to do. They're comfortable bringing some of these guys along slowly. Obviously, they brought Patrick Mahomes along slowly. That's a different situation since it's the quarterback, but we know that they're willing to let those guys work their way into the equation. It's never been completely clear that the Chiefs are quite as high on Sky Moore as the fantasy community has been. They picked him, they like him, he's looked good, and I hope he does well. I have plenty of exposure there. I think that teams like the Eagles and the 49ers are going to be the teams that jump out, figuring out what they're going to do. How much do they run? How much do their quarterbacks run? Can their quarterbacks pass effectively? This is a potential massive breakout season for Jalen Hurts, a QB we did pass on here, but we have a lot in various places. If the Eagles are basically the Cardinals or the Ravens plus this year, I guess I wouldn't be surprised, and it would be very good for me in fantasy. That's the one I'm going to have my eye on. We're wrapping back around to the 14th round pick. KJ Hamler is gone. Blair, we know it's never too early for Eno Benjamin. We still only have 1 tight end, and Noah Fant is gone. These somewhat unappealing options at that position: Austin Hooper, Hayden Hurst, Isaiah Likely, Brevin Jordan. And then I think you have to go down to Jonnu Smith and Trey McBride. Blair, you've got the FFPC ADP Best Ball tool up. Who looks like a good value in round 14?
So, yeah, in round 14, obviously, I think those tight ends you mentioned, Hooper, Hurst, Likely, are all potential options there. Eno Benjamin looks like he might not get back in the 15th, so he's someone that I would be tempted to take. You have Jerick McKinnon a little bit later, although he might be there in the 15th.
Tell us that Eno Benjamin's the pick.
Yeah, I would be more I'd be tempted to wait on tight end and see who gets back later, but obviously it's getting a little bit desperate.
What do you think? I know, Sean, we took Benjamin. Those tight ends, you mentioned Hooper earlier in the show. I'm interested to get your thoughts on him. I'm kind of thinking I don't have a huge split between those 3 guys that go in this zone. So I was kind of seeing if one of them potentially gets back to us in the next round. Hooper does go off the board. Have you him vastly ahead of the other guys? What's your thoughts on Hooper? As I don't think we've discussed it.
Well, it works as a pivot off of Burks when you don't have him, and we didn't get him this particular team. Curtis has been very high on both Hooper and Hurst. He and I have kind of gone back and forth a little bit on that one. I don't have him nearly that high, but we're now moving into the range where he gets to be a little bit more interesting. He was a nobody with the Cleveland Browns, and they needed help. And so I think anytime that you don't perform when your team needed weapons, and you don't perform for multiple seasons, to think that you're going to come out and put up a lot of production in a low volume passing offense, that I think is not the play that I like to make. But again, at a certain point, you run out of options, and a starter who could be competing with receivers who aren't good. We need guys in this particular league. I like Isaiah Likely. I think most likely he doesn't pan out, but if there's a fun play and a rookie who emerges, they have nothing beyond Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews, they could end up passing a lot more than people think. My question, Blair, would be, is this really clear for you? We took Benjamin straight up over Zamir White. White goes about a round earlier. He's in this really gross, maybe 4-person committee with the Raiders. He's currently the backup to what you might call the low-value touch role, although you would expect it to get some goal line carries. He also underwhelmed as a collegian, at least when you compare that to what people hoped he would do going in. But it seems like he may be one of these guys who is actually getting healthier after years recovering from knee injuries, could be a better NFL player than he was in college.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, White was a guy who was a really exciting recruit coming out of high school, who obviously because of that injury, it really changed the way I think we all viewed him as a prospect. But if obviously with Amir Abdullah there getting some work, it seems like he might not have much of a role to start the season, but there's a good chance that he's maybe the most talented running back in that backfield. So I definitely don't have a problem betting on that and seeing what happens.
And they do keep tending to put out the signals that they would like him to be the guy. And anytime your team wants you to be the guy, it gives you a leg up if the battle ends up being close.
So we're almost back up again, Sean. At this point, we have just the one tight end that you mentioned. We have 5 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks, 6 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs. Does this feel like a 5 running back build? Do we think we'll get another one? We're probably looking to get a 3rd tight end. What construction do you think we need to make happen at this point?
I think we have flexibility outside of whatever we do at the tight end position now. We did let it go too long, and yet I'm still excited about Jonnu Smith, excited about Trey McBride. Those would be my 2 preferences as we're trying to figure out the best plays at this point. I think because we can go with the 2 quarterbacks, that frees us up to make more picks in this 20 roster spot league. I think we have flexibility. Amir Abdullah is a mid 16th round pick. He would probably be the next guy up for me. Blair, who are you seeing here that you're wanting to look at?
Just waiting for the command center to refresh. I think some of the guys who were kind of interesting, Tyrion Davis-Price, Isaiah Spiller, I haven't been drafting a lot of them lately, but it sounds like the news is good on Jameson Williams, or maybe not good, but getting better than it was. So he's someone I have been adding at this stage of drafts as well.
Colin, I'd be good with Jameson Williams. What are your thoughts there?
I'm good with it too. I'll pitch Christian Watson. Anyone have any interest in Christian Watson? No. Sounds like a no. The advantage is that, he's obviously coming off that injury, but he's likely to see those earlier parts of the season. And Sean certainly doesn't think that we're going to see a productive season from Randall Cobb or Sammy Watkins. I had been drafting a lot of Jameson Williams maybe 6 weeks ago, and I had eased off a bit. So, yeah, I'm happy to get him there. I did feel like we needed to get back to wide receiver overall in the build. The other player, Sean, you had mentioned a couple of times, I think, when we were drafting in that kind of range, is Paris Campbell. Is he somebody you're still drafting? And did I imagine that he was somebody that you had mentioned previously on drafts?
No, I have some exposure to him. I think that as we look for a winner between Campbell and Alec Pierce, who just goes there, I believe, at the 1509, I'm not convinced that we're going to get a winner so much as we're going to see those guys really cut into each other's work. I do still think this offense is going to run through Jonathan Taylor. We know Hines is going to take some of those underneath targets, maybe a lot of them. I would expect this to be a somewhat low volume offense that is efficient, controls the clock, gets ahead, and puts teams away. I don't know that we need to prioritize those players when there are guys like Christian Watson, Jameson Williams, David Bell still on the board. Bell's situation is another one that I don't really understand. And I mention it that way because that usually is an indication that there is something that a piece of information there that I don't have. It seems to me like he missed this long period of time where a lot of other players were generating buzz, and then he came back in and was fine in the preseason games, the last couple there, but not enough to kind of restart the buzz in the light of all the other discussions, especially within the context of the Cleveland Browns offense being expected to tank now that they don't have Deshaun Watson until the end of the season. And yet when you're talking about a receiver in this range, then it's not that you don't want the early points. If he came out and had a week one that was like Anquan Bolden, one of the players who jumps up in our tools as being a legitimate comparison for him, then, that's a lot better than saying, oh, maybe he'll put up some points in weeks 11 through 17, something like that. But yet, even if we lower our expectations and simply ask him to be someone who contributes during the fantasy playoffs, that would be the range where Watson is back and playing. Now, Colm, one of the things that you've mentioned is you don't think that Watson will necessarily be good at that point. It's a lot of time to miss, and then the expectations and the attention, probably a negative for him to do what he's done in the past, especially since he didn't play last year either. So it's not like they're going to get some savior coming to the rescue down the stretch of the season, and all of a sudden the Cleveland Browns will be scoring 30 points a game. But even with that, David Bell seems like a very easy choice late in drafts.
I agree. Is Bell somebody you've been drafting a lot of, Blair?
Yes, definitely. He's someone, I don't know if I've been necessarily taking him this early, but with a lot of the guys that we like going off the board right before our pick comes up, we almost can't afford not to take him if we really want him.
Yeah, we missed out on Trey McBride went off the board, which is a really tough one, just ahead of us there. He wasn't in my range of discussions here at this point, but he was definitely somebody who I wanted to target. We are back on the clock at this point. Amir Abdullah's in the mix. David Bell's the other player in the mix. Sounds like nobody wants Christian Watson. So we're between Amir Abdullah and David Bell. Which way do you want to play it, Sean?
Well, I would be okay with Watson also. Blair, point us in the right direction.
I would be good with Watson. I think we had mentioned Jonnu Smith earlier. With how early a lot of these tight ends are going, he might be someone to consider as well. But I'm good with Watson if you want to do that, Colm.
Okay.
So that gives us a little bit of Watson exposure. We have a ton of Romeo Doubs. Watson, the player drafted earlier and before training camp, expected to perhaps be the young breakout star for the Packers. Again, a late season hammer type of bet. Jonnu Smith has an ADP in the 18th round. Obviously, you can't trust these ADPs to be something that you rely on once you get past rounds 13, 14 into that range. He could go at any time. I like him. I also think that because we have Kyle Pitts, it brings Greg Dulcich back into the equation as a possible round 20 pick, even though he's going to miss the first month of the season.
Yeah, and I also think we've kind of got ourselves into a situation where that probably has to come back into consideration. Any interest in Daniel Bellinger, New York Giants rookie tight end? What about you, Blair? There is a potential other target, and we're low on targets at this point as well.
He's not someone I have been drafting a ton of, but I can, with these late tight end targets, they kind of all become the same, really, where you're just hoping for a few touchdowns here and there. So I can be talked into him for sure.
Well, that gives us a chance to segue into discussion of the New York Giants, another team I think that even though there's the expectation that they will be gross this year, there's also a lot of uncertainty, which could be great for fantasy managers who have the guts to go after guys like Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Saquon Barkley, someone who could finish as the number one player in fantasy, or he could kind of fall/crumple into that Ezekiel Elliott type of production that we've seen the last several years. Are the Giants a team that you're going to be watching? What do you anticipate there? Could Tony stay healthy and be the second-year receiver who slingshots by not everybody, but a large portion of his sophomore peers?
I think that's definitely a possibility. I obviously, you have some concerns about kind of how good that offense is going to be, but there are some signals that they might be a little more explosive than we would anticipate. The way I'm playing that wide receiver room is just to draft a lot of Wan'Dale Robinson and not as much Tony, although I am getting him sometimes if he slips a little bit past ADP and it fits the build. But yeah, that's definitely another team that I think has some chances to be a little more exciting than they have been in the past, and the rookie wide receiver could be a big part of that.
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking of it the same way. It's really either Saquon or Robinson that's most of my exposure to the Giants. You hit on a good point, though, Sean, around the expectations for teams, and this is something that we've dealt with, particularly in the YouTube comments around when we do a draft like this, where we take Kyle Pitts, for example, or we're drafting players in the Seahawks or the Jets or the Lions, that these teams aren't going to be good. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how teams like the Bears, who the expectation is that they're going to struggle at various points of the season. The offensive line isn't very good. The Lions, for example, even how the Browns are without Deshaun Watson. There's a lot of these teams, the Texans, the Falcons, the Jets, we're going to look at them and maybe have a different light on them when we get into next week. But there's also going to be those overreactions to what actually happens in week one. And then some of these teams will come back down to earth in week two. So we'll see how that all starts to play out. One pick away, though, Abdullah continues to be there as an option. David Bell is also there as an option. So they are both very, very interesting for me at this point. Blair, have you a strong lean either way with those two options? And again, is the tight end discussion coming up? We didn't want Cameron Britt, but he goes. How should we be playing this? This is the Jonnu Smith range here. Maybe he is the way we should go.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to at least consider Jonnu Smith. But I would be good with either Abdullah or Bell as well if you guys wanted to go one of those two ways. Jonnu Smith is not someone who gets me very excited.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't have much Jonnu Smith, but
yeah,
we may need it.
You need the tight end. So I'd rather draft David Bell.
What about you, Sean?
This seems like a pretty good price for Amir Abdullah. We do have Michael Carter with a vaguely similar profile. I think Abdullah is going to catch a ton of passes there with the Raiders. For me, he's more of a 13th round value. To get him in round 17, it's almost too much to pass up, especially since we didn't get Zamir White. I don't tend to put those guys on the same team. It would be pretty disappointing to miss on Jonnu Smith, but especially when you consider how many teams have already drafted so many tight ends, wasting a pick on a player many people still expect us to be an H-back. I think we can probably afford to go Abdullah here.
And I don't think we can override Sean pitching a late round running back to us like that, can we, Blair?
Nope, I'm good with Abdullah.
We'll go with the master there. I'm always interested. I did have a brief look. I couldn't see any negative news on Twitter. I'm always interested when a player continues to slide a little bit like that. It always gives me an uneasy pause to draft them, but everything looks to still be okay with Amir Abdullah. It feels like that's a nice couple of rounds with the upside picks of the two wide receivers to pair now with the sixth running back on this roster. Finished at running back here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we need probably two more tight ends, so
we have 3 picks remaining. So yeah, I think two tight ends and see what the best option is then at the other spot. Yeah.
You can't ever be finished at running back when Ronald Jones is still available. So
yeah. Will he go undrafted? That is the question. Sean asked earlier, Blair, about players that you have to, kind of fight yourself off sometimes to draft. Ronald Jones is on that list for me. Is he on your list of players in that area, or have you found it easier not to draft him?
Well, I'm actually finding it easier to draft him now because he's so much cheaper than he was earlier in the offseason. So
Yeah, that's
even though I
my
have a lot,
problem.
I still like getting exposure in the 19th or 20th round.
Yeah, so Sean leaves the door open there for more Rojo exposure. We'll see what happens. Yeah, if I mentioned Bellinger again. Well, there goes Johnny Smith. He was the other player we were talking about. We are pretty limited though now when it comes to tight end options. I haven't drafted Taysom Hill a single time this year. Is he somebody that either of you guys are drafting? We're into a range then where Dulcich is probably our primary target. So we're into the rookie tight ends here, I think.
Taysom Hill does have a week 14 bye, same as Kyle Pitts, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, that's good. That's brilliant news to hear, actually. It just means that we don't have to draft him.
Right.
Have either of you been drafting Taysom Hill? He's somebody that, like, if something happens and he scores a lot of points, I'm just going to be wrong on it. I'm happy to be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if I've taken any Taysom Hill this season.
He's not the starting tight end, and he's not the backup quarterback.
And he's
that doesn't mean that those things
either.
couldn't
become he's the backup left tackle.
But I mean, if you're a tight end, and your two paths are to be the tight end or to be the emerging quarterback, you just would like to be either the starter at one or at least the backup at the other. The Saints seem like they have soured on him to an extent. That doesn't mean that it's an extent that doesn't give him still some possibility. Tommy Tremble is a player I would mention once you get into the desperation category that we're in. Kyle Rudolph would seem to me to be the guy who scores the most points there in Tampa Bay. And that passing offense does have enough to go around, especially in the red zone. Bellinger flashed early and then struggled some. But again, you're talking about an offense that doesn't have production from the receiving positions. And with that being the case, when you have a young player who's flashed and has that athletic ability, when you're talking 19, 20 round picks, they're more interesting again.
Yeah, so we are, again, one pick away. He goes in this kind of area. Players that we've discussed quite a bit, though, as well as David Bell, who goes just a couple of picks later by ADP, so he's definitely in play as well. I'm kind of easy with. We've started to build out with some rookie wide receivers a little bit earlier, so I would be happy to go Bell, but which way do we want to go, Blair? We're back on the clock, and Sean's devastated to know that Sammy Watkins is after going off the board.
So Bellinger, it looks like, has a 28% chance to get back to us. And
what about Bell?
Bell is 41%. So, I mean, both below 50. But if we want to get Bellinger to fill up our tight end slot, maybe this is the time.
Sean mentioned earlier this is a format where you can start up to 3 tight ends, but you can also start 1 tight end if you wish. So maybe this is a 1 tight end starting team. But it's always difficult to know. By the time we get to the end of this tournament, Bellinger could certainly be a flexible tight end here. And actually, after we make that pick, Taysom Hill and Tyler Conklin both go off the board back to back. So, yeah, we'll see now. But if Bell got back to us here, that would be fantastic. I've drafted a lot of Sony Michel when he was with the Miami Dolphins. He could be here, but I think I'm just going to wait and see how this next round plays off. It's always interesting. There's so many interesting running back options still available at this point of the season in these late rounds that are very appealing. But David Bell's probably the prime target here for us if he makes it back. Anyone else that we're pitching in for, or is it too early to start making those pitches? We'll hold off on the pitches then. Blair, which rookie scores the most fantasy points in week 1?
Probably Wan'Dale Robinson.
It's going to be hard to see anyone outscoring Damian Pierce at this point. 6 touchdowns week 1. It's going to be hard to score more than that. Any predictions for you, Sean? I know we're potentially going to do a ball prediction show before the start of the season. Which rookie are you most excited to see play this year? Or this week, I guess. This year, right? There's a lot of options with this week.
Yeah, full season, probably it's going to be Drake London. We're not 100% sure how healthy he's going to be, although he has returned to practice. Garrett Wilson is somebody else I expect to really come out. And despite the expectations for him, I think he could be very, very good right away. He is massively undervalued. I'm going to go with Romeo Doubs, right? I mean, he's the guy who has...
Yeah.
I mean, am I correct in saying back-to-back MVPs, both of which were unjustified, but back-to-back MVPs pulling the trigger to him as the number 1 wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers?
That is correct. I think I'm going to be pretty excited about seeing how that works out this week, just with it being such a different look offense for the Packers. But my favorite part of these podcasts now when we're doing it, that's the second time on the show Sean has had a shot at Aaron Rodgers. I just enjoy it so much when they pop up, because I know secretly Aaron Rodgers is his guy. So we are back on the clock. We have options. We do also have the option here, and he does go a little bit later normally, Greg Dulcich as a possible option to get that other tight end. But we do have David Bell, who we've touched on a number of times. Blair, how are you feeling here? Bell, Ronald Jones, Greg Dulcich, P. Ryan. Anyone standing out to you?
I'd probably lean toward David Bell, but if you guys have strong feelings a different way, then I don't have strong opinions on this pick. Obviously, you can't go wrong with Ronald Jones. I'm okay with Dulcich too if you want to grab him.
Sean drafted Ronald Jones. I'm just going to go in here while we're drafting and see where I'm at with Ronald Jones here.
Well, the reason that I picked Jones is that I do think that he has, despite the pitch I made earlier for David Bell as one of the most undervalued players and someone who doesn't really make sense here, he's probably going in round 15. And, those rounds maybe are a little bit interchangeable. Ronald Jones still the guy who, he just sets up so perfectly to be exactly what we got last year from Sony Michel, exactly what we got last year from Rashad Penny. In that Kansas City Chiefs offense, a guy who is still young, right? Still almost as young as a lot of the trendy players who haven't done anything, and is a former 1,000 yards from scrimmage guy. The best running back on the Chiefs. Now, it doesn't mean that they'll go that direction. We're not at practice. The note that I saw about him recently was that he's finally figuring out the Chiefs' way of doing things. The Chiefs seem like they're a very player-friendly organization. It doesn't mean they don't have high expectations, but not one of these teams that makes it hard on players. If you're having to figure out the Chiefs' way of doing things, that's a red flag, right? It's one of the reasons why he departed from the Buccaneers. I think that at that spot, his ability to win us the tournament and the leverage that he would create for us to win the tournament is greater than what David Bell gives, especially because we really are pretty well stocked at the wide receiver position. I think that running back was a little bit more than need there, but also too, and hopefully this works within the context of you guys' exposures. We got down to about 5 seconds there, and so we didn't have time to go through that. But David Bell is, David Bell, Garrett Wilson, Eno Benjamin. I probably don't need to be adding more shares to those players. Now that things have moved back in the right direction for Ronald Jones and his price hasn't adjusted, he does seem like a hammer in every draft type of pick.
That made me laugh. I hope that's okay with your exposures, Sean. This draft obviously won't update the exposures at the FFPC to the draft's over, but he was currently my third highest rostered player at 36%. So we're probably getting him into the top 1 spot after this draft.
Well, it seems like you're overdrafting him then.
Seems like I'm overdrafting him, yeah. So Greg Dulcich is my 4th highest player, so maybe we get him here in this last round to bump that up. Eno Benjamin, though, is coming in at a pretty sweet 27%, so that's going to bump up too. So a lot of these teams that I'm drafting have the same players is probably my biggest takeaway here. But If Ronald Jones is the starter for the Chiefs, I'm going to win a lot of money this year. Is probably my main takeaway as well. But the realist in me wants to say that that's not the realistic outcome. When we get back here,
fourth stringer, you're just going to be glad that he wasn't that expensive.
That's the key. The key is that I'm getting him now at prices that, at least it's not in the 10th round where I was taking him, 2 months ago. The key here is, though, 2 picks away. Are we good taking Dulcich even with the missing the first 4 weeks of the season? I'm okay with it, but how are you feeling?
David Bell is still on the board.
Yeah. I think the option is to just go all with Pitts the whole way through. We've taken him in the first round and risk it. So it is Bell is still there, but probably makes sense to take another tight end just for the overall build of the team. What are you thinking, Sean?
Well, if we had a really strong second tight end, then you'd be fine. We do not. And once we kind of get into that later range of the season, it'd be nice to have somebody else to rely on. I think that Dulcich is a good play. The Broncos obviously love him. I also really like Tommy Tremble here.
Okay. Go for it.
I'm good with either of those guys.
Sean.
We're going to time out on the last pick, which I think fits the dynamic of this draft nicely.
What? I thought you said Tommy Tremble, though. We take Greg Dulcich.
No, I just said that I like him a lot. I think that he could be the guy who does take a step forward because of Baker Mayfield there. Partly on Dulcich, if I'm going to have as many Albert O shares as I do have, then I guess I like having a little bit of Dulcich as well. Obviously, Dulcich shares are not at 0 because before it became clear that he was going to be out for the first month of the season, then there were some times where you're getting a decent price on his potential upside. This Denver Broncos offense is going to score a ton of points. The Carolina Panthers offense, it's much more up in the air. And those points that they do score, you would expect to go through Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. Those players have such a big edge on that roster. Even if players like Cortland Sutton, Javonte Williams, and Jerry Jeudy break out for the Broncos, I don't think that necessarily eliminates their tight end from playing a big role. We know based on the rhetoric coming out of Denver that they really want Dulcich to be someone who is a foundation piece for this team in the future. That's the reason why he had flipped and was going ahead of McBride for a decent chunk of time before the injury. But what do you think? Do we do it wrong? Is it a situation here where you do feel comfortable if you have Kyle Pitts in the first round? I mean, he has to be the guy who more or less scores every game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if Kyle Pitts doesn't have the kind of season we hope, then this team was probably not going to go anywhere anyway. So, you don't want to hedge too much, I guess. I do like the way this team turned out. I think we ended up with a lot of 0 RB targets to add to Javonte Williams. So we should be really strong there, stronger than a lot of my teams are at running back. And even though we didn't hammer these wide receivers early like we often do, we still got some really good guys.
Yeah, I think overall it's pretty strong. Obviously, that is if you take the tight end in round 1, running back in round 2, it is obviously going to be trickier to have those first 5 rounds of wide receivers as strong as we would in other drafts. But I think there is a lot of upside in this roster, and I think when you're in these tournaments, that's what you want to do. Sean always talks about having the team stronger, at the end of the season than it is now. If we look through the rookies that we've taken, the young players that we've taken, the running backs that are going at these points where people are expecting them to not be the starting options on rosters, things moving in the right direction. This team becomes really stacked when we get to week 7, week 8, and it could be very, very interesting. The only things we didn't really do, we didn't stack with either quarterback, but with the rushing upside, I'm never as concerned about stacking with the Russian quarterbacks because they're still going to give you that. The other thing is, outside of maybe the Bears, I do think there's going to be a lot of variety in how those points are put up for the Cardinals, particularly early in the season. Then you have to deal with, for example, we touched on it, but Hopkins coming back. So I'm not as worried about not stacking both of those quarterbacks, but I think this team is full of upside. Second tight end's obviously a concern, but again, like you said there, Blair, if Kyle Pitts, goes down in week 2, for example, you want to keep open all those paths to victory, but this team's going to be in a little bit of trouble if that does happen. But if he has the season that we're betting on with that first round pick, we may not need another tight end. I always reminisce back to last year when we started 2 tight ends in the final week. Maybe these guys are superstars. Sean, how do you feel about this team?
It looks good. And it looks good in a way that's kind of fun because it does have some resonances with the team that we drafted last year. Blair mentioned it in that last year Mark Andrews was the guy. This year we hope Kyle Pitts is the guy. Last year Jonathan Taylor was the league-winning running back. This year we could make an argument for Javonte Williams that maybe he could be that player. We had Devontae Adams early on in last year's draft. Between Gabe Davis, Deontay Johnson, and Jerry Jeudy, you have 3 shots at getting that. The place that we really struggled last season was actually at wide receiver, and this team looks built, at least in the short term, to be more powerful at that position. We have taken a few risks with players who might not be in dynamic offenses in terms of Devontae Smith, at least from a pass volume perspective, Garrett Wilson, multiple ways the Jets could be bad at more or less everything. Jameson Williams, Christian Watson, those guys are bets for later on in the season, but the upside looks like it will be there. The thing that really helped us last year was without breaking the bank, we had both Aaron Rodgers and Joe Burrow. That combination was important because we were able to play through different guys in the playoffs. One player would allow us to get through 1 week. Another player would give us the extreme upside in the finals, for example, with Joe Burrow. This team, I think, also has that with Kyler Murray and Justin Fields. Not free, but these guys didn't crush the rest of the team in order to give us those 2 shots. I like that flexibility. And again, as Blair was saying, there is a lot of running back depth. If we ended up and got to week 16, week 17, and a running back snuck into the flex position, I have to think it would be because that person is actually scoring a lot of points, not that we didn't have other options available from other positions.